Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 107. Are you using an Object-Relational Mapper, or ORM, for your Python projects? What if it could work with SQL or No-SQL databases and be fully type-safe? This week on the show, Robert Craigie talks about Prisma Client Python. Prisma Client Python is built on top of Prisma, which was created for TypeScript and Node.js. It uses a schema file to declare your application's data models and relationships in a human-readable form. The schema file allows you to easily switch the database type. Prisma Client is different from other Python ORMs. It's fully type-safe and can be used with or without async. We talk about how Robert started the project and the types of hurdles he's completed. He also shares areas of improvement and how to contribute to the project. We also have a conversation with several Real Python core team members about PyCon US 2022, which is happening this upcoming week. We'll have a booth at the conference where we hope you'll come by and connect with us. The team also shares what to expect from PyCon and what they're excited about this year. This episode is brought to you by Linear B. Their free Worker B for pull requests Chrome extension gives your team context about your PRs so that they can pick it up and review it faster. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Robert, welcome to the show.
Hi, Christopher.
You had reached out to come and talk a little bit about your project, Prisma Client for Python. And I kind of maybe want to start out with a little background. Have you worked on other open source projects before?
Not really. I've done quite a few small fixes or features that I've wanted in open source projects before, but I've not worked on anything. I've not been a maintainer on anything big.
Yeah. Were you just submitting pull requests and things like that?
Yeah, so the last thing I contributed to was Pyrite, which is the type checker and language server that powers Python and VS Code.
Yeah.
So I added them support for also completing type-dict keys, because that's what Prisma Client Python uses. That's how the queries are structured.
Okay.
That's improved the usability so much.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe we could start with what Prisma is itself before we kind of dive into what the Prisma client for Python is doing. How did you find Prisma and what is it?
Yeah, so I found Prisma, it's really big in the TypeScript space. I was working on just a website in Next.js and I heard about it and it's this sounds really cool. And Prisma it's a database toolkit. It's designed for type safety to improve developer experience when working with databases.
Yeah.
It comes with lots of things like Prisma Migrate, Prisma Studio, and the Prisma client for TypeScript.
Right. So it's like a tool that's been around in the NPM node kind of world with TypeScript. Is it one of the more popular sort of ORMs in that world?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really popular in TypeScript. I think it's 40,000 dependents on GitHub. So it's really popular.
Okay, cool.
People love it because of the autocomplete it gives you as well. That's the thing I found that's the best. It just makes it so easy to use.
Is that something that it being type, I don't want to say safe, but it has some of that in it. That is what helps it become easier for a tool like an IDE to be able to identify what the types are and kind of give the autocomplete?
Yeah, because if you don't have those types, the IDE can't know what a function is expecting, what arguments it's going to take. But when you do have those types, it can do really cool stuff, just like magic basically, and just show you all the arguments that you can pass to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's considered an ORM or an object-relational mapper, which for someone who's maybe coming into Python from, well, in my case, my background is I was working in SQL directly. That was my main, if you will, programming language. I was using other tools to kind of write it and so forth, and kind of dealing with tables directly and joining and Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. We haven't really dug much into it on the show, except for to mention popular ones, that there are these things inside of Django or other popular libraries like SQL Alchemy that kind of provide that object relationship mapper that bridge the gap for not having to write directly SQL. But what are some of the other advantages of using an ORM?
So I found the advantages with an ORM is definitely the relationship.
Okay.
So like dealing with relations in SQL, I found it to be much more difficult. ORMs help you they help you avoid mistakes that you could be making and just makes it generally easier. So especially with a type-safe ORM, it helps you catch so many mistakes that you would be making if you were just writing raw SQL directly. And
those kinds of things can be maybe minor mistakes, but could lead to even much bigger consequences depending on how you're approaching it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really small mistakes. So stuff like if you're selecting a record, and then when you test it, that record always exists, but it's not always going to exist, and you could easily forget to write code to handle the case where that doesn't exist, and then your application would just blow up. And then if you have a type-safe ORM, you're sort of forced to handle that case because your editor will get annoyed at you if you don't.
That's good, yeah. The idea of it becoming less of data returned from a query, you're kind of addressing these things as objects, which, as the world of Python is, everything is an object. And so you're kind of breaking away from having to think at the table and row sort of level.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes it way easier for me.
Yeah, okay.
It's just providing an easier abstraction over SQL. That's the main benefit, I think.
Are there other types of problems that Prisma's solving for developers?
I think it's just mainly the developer experience. That's their main goal. They want to make it as easy as possible to use databases and make database migrations and actually query on your database.
Were you using any other different ORMs before this in Python?
I actually wasn't using any other ORMs before I created Prisma Client Python because I didn't enjoy using them. I didn't enjoy the developer experience, and I found the learning curve to be really steep. And then if say I wanted to use a different database that wasn't supported, I'd then have to switch to another ORM. And then I'd learn that all over again. Or if I just wanted to switch, if I had to use an asynchronous ORM and then switch back to a synchronous ORM, I'd have to keep switching. That just does not create a good experience. And then you have to learn so many different things.
Right.
And it just,
Yeah, so having something that's standardized, and so I'm guessing we could kind of dive into that a little bit. So is there more flexibility across different types of databases then with Prisma?
Yeah, so Prisma supports lots of different databases, and it also supports MongoDB as well.
Okay.
Which I found that a lot of ORMs only support either No-SQL databases or just SQL databases. It's rare to find one that supports both.
So could you potentially have applications that then point at either type, or would it normally you would be dealing with a single database type?
I think normally you'd only be dealing with a single database type, but you might be in a situation where you want to start off using MongoDB and then switch to another database later down the line if you find that you need to. And then Prisma makes that really easy because it's a really good abstraction over that.
Nice. What goes into creating the client? Are there lots of hurdles in trying to get that ported over from being, TypeScript specifically to having the client behave in Python?
So actually, it wasn't that difficult. I ran into some issues, but there's nothing major. And so the core of Prisma is written in Rust.
Okay.
So the way it works internally is Prisma have a generated GraphQL API, and that's how queries are sent to the Prisma query engine. It was actually quite easy to support it.
Okay, good.
They've made it quite easy.
One of the statements that's there is the idea of a zero cost type safety for your database. And what does that mean?
Yeah, so that means having the type safety that Prisma provides comes at no extra cost for you as a developer to add. So if you there's nothing you have to do to change in your editor or something to get the type safety that Prisma provides.
Nice. I was going through some of the tutorial and working up the database and so forth, and you create sort of a schema initially, that you need to kind of send to kind of set everything up. And I found it kind of interesting, like, what language is that in? Because it's not quite Python, and it's got kind of an interesting sort of layout to it, the schema.
Yeah, so they've called it the Prisma schema language.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's some pretty good advantages to having a different language just for writing the schema, because then you can share the same schema between, say you wanted a TypeScript project and you wanted a Python project, you could share the same schema between both of them. So you wouldn't have to rewrite your schema all in the Python models, for example.
Yeah, okay. If a project is migrating across languages, or potentially you want to practice setting things up, at least the schema files are going to transfer across.
Yeah. All you have to do is add a generator, which is a Prisma specific. So what you can do is, a generator means you can do whatever you want with that schema.
Okay.
So you could write your own generators if you want. You can write them in Python. And so Prisma will send you the AST of your Prisma schema file whenever you run Prisma generate. And I found that to be really useful.
So that's the abstract syntax tree?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how Prisma Client Python works, really.
Okay. One of the main goals of the client is to get this thing that is called a generator, not a Python, specific, from the Python language generator, but a Prisma generator.
Oh, yeah.
And what does that do exactly?
So what that means is that when you run, say you run Prisma generator, you run Prisma DB push, which migrates your database to match your Prisma schema, it will also run generators that you've defined in the schema file. So in the TypeScript world, that's exactly the same. It works as the same. So TypeScript client is just a Prisma generator.
Okay.
And that's the same with the Python client, because that auto-generates the client, because it needs to be auto-generated to provide that type safety, because there needs to be a translation layer between the schema file and the Python code.
Okay. What were some of the things that were challenges in trying to get this running on Python for you?
So one of the challenges is that, like, the way that our Prisma generator works internally isn't documented at all. So I had to go try and reverse engineer all of it. And then actually, because the way they've structured it internally is that it's all very specific to their TypeScript client. So there's lots of just redundant stuff. And yeah, the main difficulty was the communication between. The way it works is that it uses JSON RPC. So Prisma Generate will run generators, and what that does is that starts a new process and then sends the Prisma AST over the standard input of that process.
Okay.
And I'd run into issues with that.
When you decide to tackle that task of reverse engineering, where do you start in that sort of hunt to go in if there isn't documentation?
Yes, that was difficult. So I was just running lots of different scripts and stuff. But they had a Go client. Okay. But they've deprecated that. So a lot of the reverse engineering was also just looking through that and trying to understand how that worked. Okay. And that helped a lot.
All right, so you're going on GitHub and sort of just looking at the code and or did you set up Go and try to run it and see how it behaved?
Yeah, so I did some of both, but that was really difficult because I've never used Go before. So it's a completely different world.
Yeah, I wonder about that. Would it have helped, or does it help if you know Rust to do something like this then, if it's kind of written inside of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. The way it works currently though is that instead of communicating, so Python has built-in C extensions. Yeah. So you can use that to communicate directly. You can directly call a Rust function from Python, but that's not how it works right now. Right now, Prisma have pre-built binaries, and then you download them and then run them as a separate process. Okay. And that's how that works. So you don't need to know any Rust to write your own Python and write your own Prisma client. Okay, good. It would definitely help.
It would help in ways that you would sort of understand some of the structures and being able to look at the code from that side of the fence, if you will, of what's being created.
Yeah, because I had to look through that as well for some obscure error messages, and I'd try and figure all that out as well.
Yeah, I could imagine.
So that would definitely help. Yeah.
one of the things that I was wondering about, we kind of talked about the type safety, and we kind of alluded to it earlier that it is really going to help the developer in the end. Can you think of, some of the like explicit sort of dangers that someone can run into of not having a type safe ORM?
So one of the dangers is like I mentioned earlier, that it's very easy to like let very small mistakes slip through.
Okay.
That will just result in errors that like disable your application. I think it's not more to do with dangers, it's more to do with the developer experience as well. Because especially if you have a new person coming onto your team or your project and you're working on a database.
Yeah.
If you have type hints everywhere, it's so much easier to understand how everything fits together and what you can do. Because if you don't have those types, you have to figure out, what does this function take? What are the types of the arguments? And so when you don't have type hints, you have to keep everything in your head. When you add them, they're directly in the code. So it just makes it transfers the burden of keeping those in your head onto the actual code, and then you just let the type checker do its work.
Yeah, I guess in some ways that you also can leverage the help of the IDE, as you mentioned, by it give you suggestions and things like that, and sort of nudging you in the direction of not potentially making some mistakes.
Yeah.
Did you know that the average pull request sits idle for 4 days without review? Linear B is here to help get your code merged faster with their free Worker B for pull requests Chrome extension. It gives your team context about your PRs and estimated time to review so that they can pick it up and review it sooner, letting you merge faster. Get Worker B free at linearb.io/realpython. That's linearb.io/realpython. The project is, I guess, 0.6.4. How long have you been working on it?
So I've been working on it for about a year and a half now.
Okay.
I only made it public about a year ago. Yeah, but it's been going really strong. I haven't had any massive bug reports or anything that's just completely broken.
Yeah. You have a few interesting sections on the page there where you're saying, okay, these are areas that I consider room for improvement, which I thought was interesting. I don't usually see that in documentation, and I thought that was great. Why did you choose to share a section in your docs like that?
Yes, I wanted to share a section like that because I want to be open about any shortcomings that you might encounter with the project. And because people are like rightfully so wary about adopting a new library.
Yeah.
Especially when it's something so core to how that their like application will work, like an ORM.
Yeah.
So
it can be like such a central piece of it. You make all these choices in starting up a new sort of application, and one is choosing the database, and the other would be, in this case, choosing the ORM. And so, yeah, I could kind of see how that you want people to kind of come into with their eyes open as to what's to be expected.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want people to come in and start using it and then find something that they need to be able to use, and then it just doesn't have it yet.
Okay.
And then be surprised by that.
Yeah.
So
what are areas that you are looking to improve?
So the first thing I think would be performance, because right now I haven't really looked into, I haven't done any performance benchmarks or anything like that, because my main focus has been getting everything to work and to work well.
Yeah.
And then working on the performance side of things as well.
Okay. If someone was going to contribute to the project, would there be specific types of background that they would need, or what are ways that someone can help contribute?
Well, there's no like prerequisites to say. You should have Python experience. You don't need any TypeScript or anything, or Rust or anything.
Okay.
Because the way this command line works, that's all just handed off to Prisma. We download the CLI. The CLI is written in TypeScript as well, but it's packaged into a binary. We don't deal with any TypeScript or Rust in the project at the moment, so it's literally all Python. If you want to work in the client, you should know, or it would be helpful if you had experience with Ginger, which is the templating engine that it uses. But apart from that, there's nothing really.
Okay. What would be the areas you'd be looking for contributions?
Anything really. It's obviously some parts will be much more difficult than others. I've labeled all the issues different levels. So some of them are way easier than others. And if we were looking to contribute, then you could filter all the issues by level/beginner. And that will show things that are smaller or easier to complete. And I've documented some of the workflows that I use when I'm adding new features or trying to fix a bug. That would be helpful for anyone.
In this particular case, you're using MK-Docs, I noticed. Is that a preferred documentation format that you like to use?
Yeah, I really like it. It makes it's like beautiful documentation.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to use and write. And it's just plain Markdown and it's easy.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a upcoming tutorial on it on Real Python. Kind of excited to mess with it because I do like the site is very nice, the way the documentation looks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really like it. I'm going to use it for everything. Anything that needs documentation, I'm going to use that.
One of the things that you talked about is that you could use all these different types of databases. I guess to kind of go back a little bit and think generally, where are the places that something like Prisma is going to be useful? I know anytime you talk to a database, this might be useful, but are there specific areas where something like this would excel?
Well, I think Prisma can be used basically anywhere.
Okay.
Especially because there's also the Prisma data proxy, which that handles all your database connections for you. So that's really useful in like serverless environments where you'd be restarting like Lambdas a lot. And we're having to manage the database connections inside the code. That'll just lead to like overloading the database because it'll keep adding more and more connections. So that's one place that is particularly useful.
Let's unpack that for a second, because in the case of something like a Lambda, the database connection is going to be not consistent, isn't the right word, but it's not always going to be present. And so it's going to need to be able to reestablish or keep the connection going, or how's that work?
Yes, the difficulties is the cold start times, and that you'd have to if you have many different Lambdas, you can't share the same database connection between them.
Okay.
So you can't have a connection pool that you just take from. And that leads to inefficient queries, obviously, because you have to then reconnect to the database every single time a new request comes in. Yeah,
that was kind of a way that I was doing some data science work, was that you would just do a connection for the one call and pull all the data in.
Yeah.
But in the case of other applications, it would need to be more consistent or have more back and forth between the database and the application that's calling that information. That's interesting. Like, would it being, in this case, it is async, right? The connection that you're setting up?
Yeah, so you can it's both async and synchronous. You can choose whichever one you want, depending on your use case.
Okay. And that helps somewhat with that ability to keep the connection sort of alive.
I'd say that's most useful for like just compatibility with other frameworks. So like if you want to use Flask, then you kind of need a synchronous ORM. But if you want to use something like Sanic, then you need an async ORM because that's an async web framework.
Okay, so it could work across either type.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I'd really say is that you shouldn't use Prisma if you need low-level access to the actual database connection, like you would if you're using async PG, for example, which lets you set lots of different like connection parameters and so like configuration options. Because all the connections are handled by Prisma in Rust, that's not exposed to you, and you have no control over the actual database connections.
Okay.
So if you need to use them, that's when you shouldn't use Prisma. And if you're highly performance sensitive, then you shouldn't really use Prisma either. But I'd also say you shouldn't really be using an ORM if you're that worried about performance, because it can be slow sometimes.
The abstraction adds a layer of performance hit.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Are there other projects that you're working on currently?
The other project I've worked on is Python wrapper for Pyrite.
Yeah.
Because Pyrite is written in TypeScript. So if you wanted to install it and run it locally, you'd have to install Node and install that through npm. But so I've written a wrapper over that, which will install Node for you if you don't have it, and then install and run Pyrite.
Okay.
And that's been pretty popular.
Nice. I'll definitely share links to that project too. Well, I have these weekly questions like to ask everybody. And the first one is, what's something that you're excited about in the world of Python right now? Could be an event, a book, project.
The thing I'm most excited with, which is pretty on brand, is typing in Python.
Okay.
Because lots of people don't actually use it yet. So I saw statistics from Pylance, which is the Python extension for VS Code, and only about 1% of their users actually turn on any form of type checking, which is way lower than I thought it would be. I'm really excited for more people to start using it and learn about it and make better Python applications.
I'm with you on that. It's been an ongoing kind of back and forth with a handful of other developers that are friends of mine, and my sort of co-host, Christopher Trudeau. He's not a big fan of type checking, but I can really see the advantages of it. And again, kind of coming from the database world and some of these other kinds of languages and thinking about it, I can really see the benefits. And then, I had a really good conversation with Luciano Hamayo about it. We were talking about kind of like how prototypes were his real key to getting into like why he thinks types can be real advantageous to Python development. And then I talked to Brett Cannon about, as a core developer, just this sort of deluge of peps that are all about ways that they're figuring out how to add types and kind of get all this stuff worked out. There's definitely a push and pull within the community, but that's interesting. It'd be a number to kind of keep an eye on, I guess, as a percentage. I think it's going to climb more than that.
Yeah, I'd hope so. I can understand why people are against it, because Python is a dynamically typed language.
Yeah,
and there's so much stuff you can do that you just can't represent with type hints. So I can understand when people are against it, but I think just the usability that you get from your editor is way worth it for me.
Yeah, it sounds like from things that Guido has said and other people have said that it will remain a dynamic language, but as it needs to interoperate and communicate with other languages and other packages and the wider programming world, it makes sense to at least make it available and usable. And like you said, if your code needs to interoperate, or if you want the advantages of all those kinds of, not only type safety, but just, the things that an IDE can kind of provide for you and helping, not only yourself, but like a team of people out, I can really see it being advantageous.
Yeah. I know the Python core team, they reject PEPs that would require lots of changes to like the syntax and stuff just for typing. I know they're against that, which is a bit annoying, but I can understand where they're coming from. And yeah, I wouldn't want Python to not be a dynamic language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's something that you're interested in learning next? Again, it doesn't have to be something Python specific.
Yeah, so I'm interested in learning Rust, because I haven't worked on really low level stuff at all, really, and that is really interesting to me.
Okay.
And also just the memory safety aspect, because I've done a little bit of C, and I did not really enjoy that. That was really confusing.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is like, you want to get into memory management, you could dive into C, but it sounds like Rust would be a much nicer abstraction from that.
Yeah, definitely. Because I've done a little bit of Rust, but I haven't worked very deeply in it.
Are there particular resources that you found that you're thinking of employing to learn it?
Well, I'm starting off by writing the interactions with the Prisma engine in Rust bindings instead.
Yeah.
Instead of calling out to a binary. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do first. Are
there particular books or guides that you found that have been useful?
I haven't really looked at any guides or anything. I've just been going through the Pyo3 docs, which is that builds the C extension for Python from Rust.
Okay. Do you have any particular calls to action that you want to share for people checking out the project?
Well, we have a community Discord that's been getting some new members recently, and
I
just check out the GitHub. I don't really post on Twitter or anything, so yeah, that is
So that would be the best way if people are interested in the project or reaching out to you, would be through GitHub or the Discord channel?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, both of those are really good.
Okay.
I'm active on them, so.
Nice. All right. Well, Robert, I really want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing the project with me. And I hope we can get some other people to help contribute to the project.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
I want to thank Robert Craigie for coming on the show this week. And now that conversation with several Real Python team members about PyCon US 2022. So I have a group of people from Real Python, all of who have been on the show before. And I want to go ahead and just introduce them all one by one. Dan Bader is back on the show.
Hey, how's it going? Good to be back.
And then my first interviewee was Gerana Yella.
Hi, good to see you again.
Yeah. And then another frequent guest has been Martin Broyce. And it's good to hear your voice again.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me again.
We're here to talk about this next week's big event, which is PyCon 2022. I'm very excited. This will be my first time going to PyCon. I know it is Martin's also. And so we're kind of newbies here, but I wanted to bring Dan on first to talk about what Real Python's sort of plans are. And a large group of us are coming to the convention. So we're excited to see, listeners there and other people from the Real Python community. What's some of the stuff that we're doing at PyCon this year, Dan?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a huge milestone for Real Python. It's the first time where we have our own booth space. I've attended a couple of PyCons in my life and also a couple of ones in the US. I think it's going to be my fourth one, I think. In-person one. Super excited about it. And so, like I said, the cool thing is that we actually have some booth space for Real Python for the company and to showcase our products and teaching materials, learning materials, and also to meet people, which we never had that before. And so the booth is kind of the big new thing. So if you're attending PyCon, dear listener, definitely stop by, find us on the in the exhibit hall and say hi. We'll have a selection of our books there. We have many members of our team there. I'll be there, and it'll just be a nice space to hang out and chat about Python and about Real Python, of course, as well. And we're all super excited to meet you.
Yeah, definitely. In 2019, you had done kind of like a meetup space. Now having kind of a nice meeting space, having a booth, that's going to be fun. Please come and talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Chris, you also had some plans for potentially recording a couple of podcast episodes there. So who knows, maybe we can do some semi-live broadcasting from the booth space as well, which would be super fun.
Yeah, if people are interested and want to pitch me on an idea, that's a possibility. I'm bringing equipment and we'll see how that turns out. I'm excited to see what happens with it.
It's so exciting too because it's I mean, in-person conferences are back now, which I don't know how I feel about that. It feels very unusual all of a sudden, after 2 years of COVID life.
Yeah,
but I think it's going to be good. And you also hinted at the open spaces. So open spaces are a PyCon thing where the PyCon conference makes basically meeting rooms available that anyone can book. So there's usually how it works. There's a big sort of timetable that anyone can just write a topic and on a card and then pin it to a wall, and then you kind of reserve that time slot and you can talk about anything you want, usually Python related. And we did that. We hosted a couple of those, and I helped host a couple of those at previous PyCon. So we had one like a Pythonista cafe meet and greet. Maybe that's something we'll bring back. We had a Real Python authors chat and meet and greet that we did at the last one, the last in-person conference. And so we also want to host something like that. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but probably some kind of like, hey, let's get together if you know Real Python and we'll chat about some stuff. And that gives us a chance to meet readers and learners and listeners of the podcast. And we'll just, hang out for a bit and get to know each other. And I think that's going to be super fun as well. And it's a bit more of a probably like smaller setting than the exhibit hall because depending on how busy it gets, and our booth is not very large, I'll say that too. I don't know what people are going to expect, but we're a pretty small company, so it's not going to be a massive booth, but
right.
We'll definitely also host the open space.
How was the open space the last time, Dan?
It was, I'll be honest, it was really overwhelming because we forgot the exact numbers, but I think it was more than 50 people showed up. And so we're like, okay, how do we do this? And we made this giant, circle of chairs to kind of do some intros, and basically did 30 minutes just of intros and some chatting and whatnot. But it was kind of mind-blowing at the time, that there were so many people who went to PyCon, also knew about real Python, and thought it was cool enough to go to an open space like that. And I know, kind of heartwarming. We have a couple of photos on the website. Maybe one of them is also in your article, Gerarne, in the PyCon guide article. Yeah, like every time I see that photo, I sort of smile, and it's like, hey, this is the coolest thing. So many people showed up, and it's just nice.
I'm really looking forward to potentially meeting some, people who read our articles and watch our videos and just get to interact with some people there. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, I have virtually met, I don't know how many people, potentially over, 60, 70 people for the show. And never, I hardly even did video with them. Mostly it's been audio only. And so it'll be really interesting to meet them. I think people may recognize me more from my voice and my laugh. So that'll be interesting. Yeah, to talk about, there's an article that was put out for the 2019 PyCon, and it was by James Mertz, and you've been updating that, Gerarne, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what's in that, and it should be out the time this podcast comes out. It's kind of a bit of a guide in some ways.
Yes, so James Mertz, as you said, wrote a fantastic guide 3 years ago for the Cleveland conferences. And it's not really so much about the Cleveland conference. It's more just about what is PyCon in general and what can you do when you're at PyCon? How should you prepare for it and those kind of things.
Cool.
So it kind of talks a little bit about the tutorials, the conference itself, the sprints afterwards, but also things happening sort of like around the conference. So in the evenings, there are dinners, there are lightning talks. During lunch, you can look up, find new friends. I guess that's one of his advice, is to make a new friend every day. And then there's also the opportunities for volunteering and how that's something that is really helpful to the conference, but also very giving to yourself, so to speak, to kind of meet new people that kind of have an interest and give back a little bit to the community. So it's a really nice article that we put out then 3 years ago, and we just went through it, updated it, make sure everything that's in there still makes sense, updated the links to this year's conference in Salt Lake City. It's hopefully a valuable resource to anyone going to PyCon.
Yeah, thanks for updating it. I'm excited to kind of go through it now that I see it. It's just about out. And so I can kind of look behind the schedule and say, all right, let's see what's going on here. And speaking of those separate kinds of things that can happen there, the first couple days kind of before the opening, there are tutorials, and you were involved in teaching some of those over the last couple of years, mostly virtually. Have you done one in person?
No. So I guess in 2019, I went to a few tutorials, really nice tutorials. And then I was presenting or teaching a tutorial both in 2020 and 2021 when they were virtual. So I haven't been able to actually see people in person when I was teaching this. So this year I'll be going to see some tutorials again. I'm not teaching this year. I'm really excited about, again, all the fun stuff that's happening there. These, you need to sign up for them, and they cost a little bit of money. And I think most of them are filled up now, but there's still possibly a few there's still some open seats. So I definitely recommend that people go to the tutorials as well. They kind of more relaxed and more of a learn new stuff feeling than the faster talks during the main conference.
I gotta admit something now, because Chris, I told you that I haven't been to PyCon, but I've actually been to a PyCon before, and I joined some of the tutorials there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Great.
I haven't been to the big US PyCon, but in 2019, I was at the New Zealand PyCon.
Oh, cool.
Which is a pretty small one. And it was the 10th PyCon in New Zealand. So it was PyCon X. And yeah, I tried a couple of tutorials there and had a bit of the PyCon experience just on a smaller scale. But it was really nice. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time there. And I enjoyed going to some of the tutorials. So yeah, just echoing what Gerarne says there. Yeah,
the only conference that I went to was in 2019 also. That was Python related, which was PyColorado, and it hasn't kind of been revived in a virtual form or anything yet. It was its first inaugural, version of it. And I've attended PyCon virtually. So this will be my first in-person one since 2019. I guess probably for a lot of people that may be the case. So And tutorials are definitely something I'm interested in. I haven't gone ahead and signed up for one this particular time, but it is something that I find that format, like you said, to be a little more, like almost 3.5 hours or something like that. So it's a little more time than a lot of these talks, which are, well under an hour. And so it's a chance to really dive into a subject and get across all these ideas. And so, yeah, those are fun. And then that's on the 27th and the 28th. And then the opening reception is the night of the 28th. This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It's about a very popular framework for quickly making APIs in Python. The video course is titled Python REST APIs with Fast API. It's based on a tutorial written by the creator of the library, Sebastian Ramirez. And in the course, Douglas Starnes takes you through how to use API best practices, including validation, serialization, and documentation. How to use path parameters to get unique URL paths per item. How to receive JSON data in your request using Pydantic. And to test your APIs as you develop it with Swagger and HTTP IE. How to use all the REST HTTP commands of get, post, put, and delete to behave as typical CRUD database commands. And the course leaves you on a path to continue learning about Fast API for your use cases. If you want to get up and running quickly with a REST API in Python, Fast API is a great choice. Like most of the video courses on Real Python, the course is broken into easily consumable sections. You get code examples for the techniques shown, and all courses have a transcript including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the search tool on realpython.com. Then Friday is when it starts to get into the talks, and I just want to mention a couple real quick. These are from previous guests. Anthony Shaw has a talk, Write Faster Python, Common Performance Anti-Patterns. I just talked to Pablo Galindo Salgado about the error messages, and his talk is Making Python Better One Error Message at a Time. Sam Scott, who's on the show, is talking about why authorization is hard. Dustin Ingram is talking about securing the open source software supply chain. We talked about a lot on our show. And then Calvin Hendricks Parker was recently on the show, and we actually talked about this quite a bit, about bootstrapping your local Python environment. And then a few that are not guests, but people that I'm interested in. There's the creator of Arcade has an interesting one, Paul Vincent Craven, about harvesting the power of the GPU for awesome special effects, which I think will be fun. People know I'm into graphics and sound and stuff. So are there ones that you guys are intrigued in checking out? Martin, do you have any in particular?
So I don't actually have any ones that I want to go to for sure at this point. Like my main thing at PyCon is probably going to be just being at the booth space and getting to know, people that come by.
Yeah.
And then also getting to know the people from the team, because I actually haven't met anyone in person yet. So that's pretty exciting for me as well.
Yeah.
So that's going to be my main thing. And then I think I'm going to kind of like schedule some talks around that and just see what's up there, I think. But there's a couple of names of people that I've met or kind of met over my time as a programmer. So if there's a familiar name in one of the tutorials, I'm probably going to see if I can go there and say hi and see what they're talking about. This is kind of my idea. But I'm more planning to do it as a less attending talks and more just being at the space.
You sound like me as far as how I plan vacations. I know all this stuff is happening, and I know all these things are there, and I'm going to go enjoy them as I go, and and I'm not going to make a big deal out of any of it, And so I live with someone who's an entire planner on the other side, and everything's scheduled down to the minute. So I guess my response was sort of a hybrid of that. But I think the hallway track is a great option, and now we actually have a dedicated space to do a lot of that stuff. And cool. Are there ones that you're interested in checking out, Dan?
So my sort of dirty conference secret is that I don't really go to the talks as much, especially when they're available online. And that's, I don't know, maybe that's kind of a controversial thing, because obviously if nobody goes to the talks, then why do you even have the conference and stuff? So, definitely folks go attend the talks that you're interested in. I'm also planning on, seeing a couple, kind of weaving that in with my day there. But these days, usually for me, it's like almost more of a marketing thing. spreading the gospel of real Python.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely my focus. Like the booth is not very cheap, and we only have like some time there. And I want to tell people about the various like sponsorship offerings that we have, and our real Python for Team training product that we launched a year ago. And just kind of, for me, it's very much like these days has like a business appeal to it as well, or like that's like the main focus for me for the conference for sure. On the other hand, it's such a cool experience to go and see a talk live. I remember my first PyCon. I think one of the first talks I saw was the talk on I think it's called Beyond PEP 8 by Raymond Hedinger. That was just a standout talk that I really enjoyed. And kind of Raymond was one of my Twitter idols, and I've been following him for a long time. And it's just super cool to go and like see someone like him, like perform that talk live and kind of be able to follow along and stuff. And so I think that's just a really cool experience you can have at any sort of conference or technical conference. And then the other just great thing is the hallway track, right? Like you're walking around and you're maybe grabbing a coffee somewhere, and then, there's Guido. There's Carol Willing. There's Mariata. There's Pablo, right? Like, and you just see people that, if you recognize them, maybe you've seen them before. Otherwise, it's kind of hard if you just interact with people through a handle and whatnot, like we all do these days.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like this cool sort of nerdy stomach tingle of like, oh, wow, like these people had such a big influence on my life through Python. And now I can actually like just chat with them or just maybe like even just see them in as a real person. And that to me is like the best thing about a conference like PyCon, that you can, actually put like a face to a name, or actually like interact with someone that you've only ever met online. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And then for the talks, I'll download some when they're available on. Usually they get posted to YouTube, so I can like offline stream them and rewatch them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the focus I think is going to be just meeting lots of people.
Yeah, as many as possible. So, what's been your experience with doing talks and checking them out at the conferences, Garona?
Yes, I do enjoy going to talks, and I hope to hit a few this time as well. Kind of try to mix in a little bit both, say, people I'm interested in watching and listening to and meeting, and just topics that sound really, really fun. So I think last time I ended up attending online, one about knitting, just because I was interested in how do they use this in the knitting community. I don't do any knitting myself, but my sister and nieces do. So that kind of one thing. This time, I see there are several people not on the core team, but people who have written articles for us that I've interacted with through the review process that are giving talks.
Yeah.
So Mashi Sadka, Jan-Hein Boerman, and you mentioned Anthony Shaw already, at least. So it will be fun to at least meet them and hopefully go to their talks. And then there's some talks more about, say, interesting topics. Like I'm really interested in the whole structural pattern matching thing that came up in 3.10, and Bernd Bucher, is that his name? Who was kind of the main person implementing it, is giving a talk about it. I know in one of the keynotes, Sarah Issaun is giving a talk about finding black holes with Python. I actually managed to see a talk by her probably in the last in-person conference I was at back in 2019 as well, and it was really, really nice. So I'm looking forward to be able to go to see some of those talks. Yeah, you mentioned also giving a talk. So in 2019, I was able to give a small presentation about essentially how to modularize your code. And it was a really nice experience to give a presentation at PyCon, in the sense that it was, of course, it's much bigger than anything else. And it also you have people that are kind of walking you to your to the talk, making sure you get there on time, and they're kind of, you get your own silent room where you can sit and prepare and those kind of things. So
yeah.
This year I'm also signed up to be a volunteer for a couple of these sessions, just to be one of these runners to just help people out and things like this. So hopefully it should be fun.
How do you do that? How do you sign up as a volunteer?
Yeah, so on the PyCon webpage, there's a separate tab saying volunteers. So you just kind of click into the volunteers, and then that there's tons of things they want some help with, and a lot of them sound a lot of fun, and especially great places to meet people. including everything from just stuffing swag into bags to being part of the registration part and welcoming people. And somehow last year in 2019, I was welcomed by, his name is escaping me right now, something. He was kind of the boss of the whole conference, and he was kind of volunteering, sitting in and doing my registration. So it's kind of nice to see how even at this big level, people are all coming together and helping each other out.
Yeah. And then, not to forget, there's also some stuff after the main conference talks. The PyCon usually includes a section for doing sprints. And I think that both Gerarna and Martin, you both were thinking about attending that.
Yeah.
And Gerarna, you've done sprints a couple times, I think.
Yes. So I guess the main conference I typically used to go to, at least, is called EuroSciPy. Since I'm in Europe, it's easier to kind of get around there.
Yeah, the journey's easier.
The journey is much easier, and it's a really nice smaller conference around scientific Python in Europe, maybe 100, 200 people, and they've always had 1 to 2 days of usually 1 day of sprints, I guess. So I usually stayed for the sprints there, and it's a really nice opportunity to just meet people working on a project. It's not always that I kind of get to do what I feel are, say, meaningful contributions to the project, but at least I get to know the project a little bit better. And typically I'll manage to put my name into some kind of commit there. So you can kind of brag that I have committed something into it, even though it's just it's just a small thing, but it feels nice to just be able to see a little bit how are these projects run from the inside and get to know the people running the project. So I definitely recommend it.
Yeah.
I joined the sprints last year during the online PyCon. So there were some sprints organized as well. I don't entirely remember what it was, but it was something like how Gerarna just described it. I think there was, a favicon or something like that. They were asking for a favicon for some Python-related site. Maybe it was Learn Python, like a PSF learning Python site or something like that. That needed, are they called favicons? These tiny things that are on top that you see in your tabs. Yeah. So I think I designed one for that, and then committed it into the repo or something.
Oh, nice.
Cool.
Yeah, I think one of the most common, say, ways to contribute during sprints is to help out with some kind of documentation or those kind of things, because those are easier to get into than kind of getting a hold of the whole code base and figuring out how you can actually contribute code. It's of course cool if you're able to do that as well, but really, if you just have some time to hang out, you can always, if so, help out with cleaning up some of the docs, which is super helpful for everyone involved, right? And
and meet people that are doing the project. Kind of learn a little bit more about the contribution process, and that there are actual people behind those repos, and stuff like that. I think is really kind of cool. And so I haven't planned to extend my stay to do that, but I'm really kind of leaning in that direction and thinking about it. So we'll see if I can accomplish that.
You don't have a flight back, so
I don't. I'm driving, which is kind of fun. I'm coming from Colorado, so it's not too far from me, but I am taking the only vehicle that we have. So I'm sort of loading up the freezer for my wife and then splitting town with the car. So that is a little different, but we'll see. It's very international. Our particular group of people coming. Ian's coming. He's currently Barcelona,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin, you're coming from
Austria, in Graz.
And Dan's in Vancouver, the home office. And Gerarna, you're coming from Norway.
Yep.
And yeah, awesome. So yeah, it's going to be a real interesting group. And Bartosz is coming from Poland. Yeah, so lots of our core team, are very international also. So it's going to be fun to kind of, like you said, it'll be our first time really meeting everybody.
Yeah.
We've never met in person, except Gerarna and I. We hung out at the last in-person PyCon, but it's going to be super awesome to meet all of you for the first time in person, outside of Zoom and Skype and whatnot. It's going to be so great.
Yeah,
totally.
Are there any other last things you guys want to mention? Dan, you want to go first?
Lightning talks are cool. I don't know. I always enjoyed the lightning talks. So how the lightning talks work, I think people sign up at the conference directly, and it's basically a talk slot in the schedule where people can give these. They're capped at I think it's 5 minutes or maybe even less than that. And so it's basically these like micro talks, just a couple of slides, and for people to showcase their project or something they learned. And I always thought that those were super fun and have a lot of, just a lot of great energy usually. And definitely planning to check those out. Yeah, stop by the booth. If you're at PyCon, stop by the booth. If you're participating virtually, I'm sure there's going to be some online virtual conference this year as well. If you cannot make it to Salt Lake City, then there's probably also some real Python folks going to be there. So say hi as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, super looking forward to the conference.
Garana, any last thoughts?
Yes, I guess I just really look forward to meeting people after being stuck at home for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And both, my colleagues who I just see through Zoom, but in particular the community, and actually some people I mainly just interact with through Slack messages probably. So really looking forward to meeting people who are using real Python in any way, and hearing about your experiences and how we can improve and what we should continue doing there.
Yeah. And Martin?
Totally what Geir Arne said. I completely agree with that. And also, one experience that I've made, or something that is maybe nice to keep in mind, is that, there's a lot of people there and you've got a lot of chance to meet a lot of people. And I think it's good if you're open to this kind of interactions, it's good to take the time, and you can just stop by a group of people that are chatting and just kind of like stand next there. And usually people are going to open up the circle and you're going to be included in the conversation.
Yeah. I heard it called a Pac-Man thing. They always should leave a little bit open in that circle.
That's nice. Yeah. And then you can also leave again. If you're like, this doesn't really interest me that much, you can always be like, hey, nice meeting you, and just walk on and look for something else. So don't be shy, just try it out. And like everyone's really welcoming and friendly. At least the one meetup in New Zealand that I was, I assume it's going to be different in terms of how people behave and what I've heard from PyCon US as well. So yeah, make it your conference and do what you enjoy most when you get there.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet listeners of the show. And if you have ideas and you want to pitch them to me, feel free to come up to the booth and talk to me, or, somebody can get that information to me if I'm not there at that moment. And yeah, I'm excited to meet all of you guys in person. And yeah, this is going to be fun. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing all that with me. Thanks, Dan.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for hosting this, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin, for coming on the show again.
Yay. Pleasure.
And thanks, Garana, as always.
Always a pleasure. See you soon.
This episode was brought to you by Linear B. Their Worker B for pull requests Chrome extension gives your team context about your PRs and estimated time to review. Get it free at linearb.io/realpython. I again want to thank Robert Craigie, Dan Bader, Garana Yella, and Martin Broyce for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and look forward to talking to you soon.